Surviving images in a North American landscape are part of the family story of border crossings and exile, the journey of a grandfather of mine, a painter, who left his country as a conscientious objector, intending to reach New York City, but who did not go any farther than Lyon in France, where he met my grandmother. Donc en français aussi, je voudrais résumer un petit peu tout cela pour dire que ma présence ici correspond aussi à la poursuite d'un itinéraire personnel et familial, celui de l'itinéraire d'un grand-père qui avait choisi l'exil vers New York, mais dont le voyage fut interrompu en France. Par une rencontre avec celle qui devait devenir donc ma grand-mère. Et c'est donc une sorte de poursuite aussi un petit peu de cet itinéraire que j'ai l'impression de faire ici aujourd'hui. Surviving images in a North American landscape. Ou pour les francophones, un titre légèrement différent, l'énigme du visible et les paysages nord-américains. En quelques mots, ces paysages nord-américains, en particulier dans l'espace canadien, ceux de la zone côtière de Colombie-Britannique, vont être abordés sous l'angle de l'image survivante, revisitée par Georges Didi Huberman à la suite d'Abby Warburg, comme épitomée de l'énigme du visible telle qu'elle se manifeste dans la création contemporaine, souvent hybride et intermédiale. Donc, parmi les créations symptomatiques que nous envisagerons figure l'œuvre envoûtante de Marilyn Bowring. C'est un nouveau regard par-delà les frontières du visible que cette auteure canadienne de poésie et de fiction porte sur un espace géographique lointain qui lui est familier. Dans un roman, d'ailleurs converti en œuvre musicale, qui entraîne le narrateur et le lecteur à sa suite, à la découverte ou à la redécouverte de l'île de Vancouver, des eaux qui la baignent et des îlots qui l'entourent. La confusion suggérée par le titre du roman, « To all appearances a lady », donc cette confusion entre apparence et réalité s'inscrit en filigrane dans ce récit des confins, où toutes les frontières spatiales, temporelles, raciales, culturelles sont brouillées. Les caractéristiques du paysage sont indissociables du mystère émanant du métissage du personnage. Ainsi, le visible s'appréhende-t-il dans son rapport à une hantise propre à l'invisible. Il s'agit d'un paysage qui s'estompe progressivement dans les brumes du Pacifique, dans lequel nous faisons l'expérience d'une production d'un visible qui se dérobe à notre regard et à notre intelligibilité. Back to English now, with my starting point, which will be a quotation from John Berger, who wrote what he called a small theory of the visible. The impulse to paint comes neither from observation nor from the soul, which is probably blind, but from an encounter. So this is going to be my starting point, together with a questioning. And I'm not sure I will get any proper answers to that question. Well, this question seems to be at the core of the novel I'd like to use as a basis for this investigation of the borders of the visible. The question is as follows: how did you become what you visibly are? Asks the painter. So it's both a question and also a hint at what artists, painters, visual artists in general may help us realize. In Georgiana Harding's novel Painter of Silence, a nameless man is found on the steps of the hospital in Romania. He's deaf and mute, but a young nurse recognizes him from the past and brings him paper and pencils so that he might draw. Gradually, memories appear on the page. And strangely enough, those memories are described not in visual terms, but in auditory terms. The otherness of the past reverberates like a tuning fork. this leads me to a sample of how the auditory and the visible, or the audible and the visible, may at times coincide rather than be antithetical or represented as polarities. So I'd like to play a short sample of a piece of music, vocal music, that was composed by a British composer who was inspired by the novel written by Marilyn Bowring. Oops. Is that okay? Can you hear? So sorry.
All right, let's go again.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça? The blurring of boundaries is what I would like. Thank you. The blurring of boundaries is what I would like to address first with this example of a piece of music inspired by a novel. This novel by Marilyn Bowring, entitled To All Appearances a Lady, questioning from that very title what we understand as appearance. In this very strange novel, this sort of haunting novel, Bowring, who is both a novelist and a poet, sets her hero on a voyage around Vancouver Island with the ghost or spirit of his just deceased stepmother. And the plot itself helps us question the boundaries between appearance and reality, but also between appearance and disappearance, between visibility and invisibility, between past and present, presence and absence, knowledge and ignorance, experience and innocence, given that this journey is that of a man trying to understand the enigma of his origins, of his parents, his biological parents being indeed both his father and his mother, being a mystery to him, and the ghost of his stepmother serving as a sort of guide, be it in a dream, a trance, or just in his imagination, the go-between that will help him eventually face the riddle of who he is. Now, painting is an affirmation of the visible which surrounds us, or so we think. And this visible continually appears and disappears. And on the picture here, you can see that there's a whale here, which is both appearing and disappearing. And this is something that I will come back to in a moment, and that will serve as a sort of metaphor for what may connect the visible and the audible. Now, I quote again from John Berger's essay on the visible. In the realm of the visible, all epochs coexist and are fraternal, whether separated by centuries or millennia. And when the painted image is not a copy, but the result of the dialogue, the painted thing speaks if we listen. If we listen. Now, this is what Gavin Bryars invites us to do, right? Listen to that spirit, which is the spirit of that part of British Columbia where water, sky, earth seem to merge. And it's no coincidence if the composer, right, who was inspired by the novel that Marilyn Bowring had written about this area of British Columbia, it's no coincidence if Bryars, or rather his music, falls under no category. This is Canadian novelist Michael Ondaatje, who himself described the work or the music of Gavin Bryars in the following terms. The music of Gavin Bryars falls under no category. It is mongrel, full of sensuality and wit, and is deeply moving. He is one of the few composers who can put slapstick and primal emotion alongside each other. He allows you to witness new wonders in the sounds around you by approaching them from a completely new angle with a third ear, maybe. Now, beyond this example, I'd like to contend that not only is the plot of the novel centered on what might be termed a ghost story, but that the landscape, which serves not as a backdrop, but which is perhaps the main character in that story, is closely connected to memories of another artist who happened to be a painter and also a woman who not only wrote and painted about the totem poles and the forest of British Columbia, and I'm sure that you've recognized Emily Carr, the Canadian artist of the Pacific Northwest coast. But Emily Carr was also the one who, in a strangely fascinating tale or short story, approached the unutterable, perhaps the unenterable mystery of motherly love that François Soulages mentioned this morning. Now, before reading a short excerpt from this text, I'd like to show you some images of Emily Carr's paintings in which the threshold of the visible world, as it were, appears. Oops. It's not working anymore. Je ne peux pas les mettre en grand.
C'est en preview, voilà.
Ouais, ça les coupe. Ouais. Bon, on va les laisser comme ça. Peut-être qu'on va juste les agrandir un peu. Oui, voilà. So this is the coast of British Columbia that is both conjured up in the novel and in the paintings of Emily Carr. Oops, I don't know why I can't go from one to the other. Anyhow. So those forsaken villages that she wanted to picture in order to live some testimony, some trace of those disappearing villages, just as, where is it? Before her, Curtis had endeavored to, as a photograph, not as a painter, of course, as you know, to photograph the so-called vanishing Indian. So contrary to Curtis, Carr wanted to picture the landscape, the villages, not the Indian themselves, not the indigenous people themselves, but their surroundings, and perhaps more importantly, the totem poles that they carved. So this is a shark. This is a beaver. And you'll notice the prominence of the eyes in all of those totem poles. And I'd like to start on this one, because this is a representation in the mythology of the natives, First Nations, that area, of a mythical feminine figure called Tsunoqua. And I'd like to read a short passage from one of the short stories in which Ka narrates her encounter with that Tsunoqua. I was sketching in a remote Indian village when I first saw her. The village was one of those that the Indians use only for a few months in each year. The rest of the time it stands empty and desolate. I went there in one of its empty time, in a drizzling dusk. When the Indian agent dumped me on the beach in front of the village, he said, "There's not a soul here. I will come back for you in 2 days." Then he went away. So then she describes how she almost stumbles upon that totem pole. And this episode is narrated 3 times. So there's no knowing whether this is a sort of literary trick on her part or whether she actually did experience this 3 times. But there is a sort of crescendo, sort of incremental repetition in the narration. First encounter. Water was in the air, half mist, half rain. The stinging nettles, higher than my head, left their nervy smart on my ears and forehead as I beat my way through them, trying all the while to keep my feet on the plank walk which was hid. Big yellow slugs crawled on the walk and slimed it. My feet slipped, and I shot headlong to her very base, for she had no feet. It was not the fall alone that jerked the O's out of me, for the great wooden image towering above me was indeed terrifying. So I skip to the next encounter. Several years passed. I knew her by the stuck-out ears, shouting mouth, and deep eye sockets. These sockets had no eyeballs, but were empty holes filled with stare. The stare, though not as fierce as that of the former image, was more intense. And the paragraph ends with, the fingers were thrust into the carven mouths of 2 human heads held crowns down. From behind, the sun made unfathomable shadows in eye, cheek, and mouth. Horror tumbled out of them. And this is the interesting part. I saw Indian Tom on the beach and went to him. Who is she? The Indian's eyes, coming slowly from across the sea, followed my pointing finger. Resentment showed in his face, greeny brown and wrinkled like a baked apple. Resentment that white folks should pry into matters wholly Indian. Who is that big carved woman? I repeated. Tsunoqua. No white tongue could have fondled the name as he did. Who is Tsunoqua? She is the wild woman of the woods. What does she do? She steals children. To eat them? No, she carries them to her cave. That, pointing to a purple scar on the mountain across the bay, is one of her caves. When she cries, ooh, Indian mothers are too frightened to move. They stand like trees, and the children go with Tsunoqua. Then she's bad. Sometimes bad, sometimes good. And this is how this story ends. Third encounter. She appeared to be neither wooden nor stationary, but a singing spirit, young and fresh, passing through the jungle. There we were, Zenokwa, the cat, and I, the woman who only a few moments ago had forced herself to come behind the houses in trembling fear of the wild woman of the woods, wild in the sense that forest creatures are wild, shy, untouchable. So this was just an example of how the contemporary artists, writers, musicians who deal with the visuality of the Canadian landscape of that area, maybe, if not influenced, definitely haunted by some of the images that Emily Carr had left, right, of those totem poles in the forest, and of both the way they could be seen and the way they could also see us. The boundaries of the visible, in the case of Emily Carr, are also the boundaries of the thinkable. And they hint at the return of the visible, which is part, perhaps, of regional or even national history. But those boundaries are, more importantly, the boundaries of human imagination, whatever the country or the period of time, and they help us perhaps grasp what intervisibility or co-visibility may be about. So I will stop here, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you might ask about this corpus or about the other elements that I had no time to talk about today. Thank you.